Clara Bennett froze in the doorway, her breath catching as her eyes fell on the unfamiliar sight. Neatly placed in the entryway sat a pair of women's boots. Boots that weren't hers. For a moment, her mind refused to accept what her eyes were telling her. Perhaps a guest, a friend of Richard's sister, but deep down, a cold heaviness began to spread through her chest. Drifting from the bedroom, faint sounds silenced her thoughts. They weren't sounds of conversation. They were unmistakable, intimate, and left no room for doubt. Her legs felt like lead as she forced herself forward, one step at a time down the narrow hall of their Boston apartment. Each step made her heart pound harder until her hand finally gripped the bedroom door frame. She pushed it open. There was no mistake. In their bed was Richard Hale, the man she had trusted, the man she had believed in for years, with a red-haired woman. The scene was almost cliché, like something from a bad TV drama, but it was happening in her life, in her home. A lump rose in her throat so quickly she thought she would choke. Tears stung her eyes, threatening to spill over, but Clara fought them back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She turned, slammed the door with a force that made the walls tremble, and bolted out of the apartment. The icy air of late winter hit her face as she stumbled down the front steps and out onto the street. Her breath came in ragged gasps, forming clouds in the frigid Boston night. She pressed her scarf hard against her face, trying to hold in the sobs. It didn't work. How could he? The words tore from her lips, hoarse and raw. A passerby turned his head, thinking she was speaking to him. But Clara was already hurrying away, boots crunching in the snow. That apartment, the place she had called home, was no longer hers. She knew she would not go back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The snow whipped across her face, driven by a biting wind. The streets were almost empty, the storm turning the city into a desolate maze. Clara's eyes burned, her chest aching with each breath. In the distance, a glowing cafe sign offered a small refuge. She pushed through the door, the bell chiming weakly overhead. The warmth inside made her shiver all the more, her body reacting to the sudden change. But as her hands fumbled for her bag, panic set in. She had left it at the apartment. Her wallet, her money, everything was still back there. Frantically, she searched her coat pockets. Her cold fingers scraped together a few coins, barely enough for the cheapest item on the menu. She handed them to the barista, who gave her a sympathetic glance but said nothing, and placed a steaming paper cup in front of her. Clara wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat seep into her frozen skin. She sat at the far corner table, staring at the dark swirl of coffee as if it could offer her answers. No money, no man, no anchor, she thought bitterly. For years she had poured herself into their shared life, supporting Richard, helping with the publishing business, building what she thought was a future together. And now, in a matter of minutes, it had all been destroyed. The cafe's lights dimmed slightly, a sign that closing time was near. The barista began wiping tables, stacking chairs. Clara pulled her scarf tight again and stepped outside. The snow had thickened, heavy flakes swirling under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Going back home was an option. The thought of facing Richard, of facing that woman, was unbearable. Clara's stomach twisted at the idea. She needed somewhere else, somewhere she wouldn't feel like she was suffocating. Her gloved hand brushed against the ring of keys in her coat pocket. Among them was the key to her office at the publishing house. She had worked there for years, often late into the night, sometimes sleeping on the couch in her office during deadlines. It wasn't home, but it was safe. The decision came instantly. Clara pulled her coat tighter and headed in the direction of the office, snow crunching under her boots. Her mind raced with fragments of memory, with questions she couldn't answer. When had it started? How many times had Richard lied to her face while sneaking off with someone else? And why had she been too blind to see? The city loomed silent around her. Storefronts were shuttered, sidewalks blanketed in white. A lone taxi crawled past, its headlights blurring in the storm. She walked on, each step heavy, her breath coming in uneven bursts. By the time the building came into view, her hair was damp with melted snow, and her body trembled from exhaustion. The guard at the front desk looked up in surprise as she entered, brushing flakes from her shoulders. "Miss Bennett." His voice was gentle, curious. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Clara forced a thin smile, her voice unsteady. I need to stay the night in my office if that's all right. The old security guard hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He had known Clara for years, had seen her dedication to the job, her kindness to everyone in the building. Of course, he said softly. I'll put on a pot of tea. You look frozen. Gratitude swelled in her chest. She managed a quiet thank you before heading upstairs. Inside her office, she collapsed into the chair, clutching the warm mug the guard had given her a few minutes later. The room smelled faintly of books and ink, familiar and steady, but her heart was anything but steady. Tears she had fought so hard to contain finally spilled down her cheeks, burning her skin as she pressed her hands to her face. The sound of her sobs filled the empty office. Clara had thought she knew the man she lived with, the life they shared. She had thought she was building a family, even without a wedding ring. Tonight all of that was shattered. She was alone in a storm. And though she had found a temporary shelter, the world she had built was gone. The next morning, Clara had barely slept on the warm couch in her office. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her mind restless with images she couldn't erase. She thought she had reached the bottom of despair. But the day had more to reveal. The sound of footsteps startled her. She sat up quickly, brushing at her face just as the office door swung open. Richard Hale stood there, immaculately dressed, as if nothing at all had happened. His dark coat was free of snow, his expression disturbingly calm. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice sharp and weary at once. Richard shrugged, his tone almost casual. "I came to check on you. You ran out last night. Thought you might do something dramatic." Clara rose to her feet, her anger barely contained. "You were with her in our bed, Richard. In our bed. And you think I'm the one being dramatic?" He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned against the doorway with an air of superiority. "Clara, don't twist this. Affairs happen. It's not the end of the world. Maybe if you had been more attentive, more exciting. Maybe if you hadn't buried yourself in work all the time, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her breath caught, outrage mixing with pain. "Don't you dare blame me for your betrayal." Richard's eyes hardened. "You've always been too emotional, too fragile. Do you know how exhausting it is to deal with someone like that every day? I deserve better. I deserve someone who makes me feel alive." Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, to strike him, but the shock had drained her of strength. "You've destroyed everything we built together. You've destroyed me." Richard pushed off the doorway, stepping closer, his voice low and venomous. "Don't be melodramatic. You'll survive. You always do. But don't think you can take what's mine. The apartment, the business contacts, the life we had, that's mine. You're nothing without me." Her body stiffened. She had never heard him speak this way before. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone cruel and unrecognizable. She gathered her bag from the desk, her movements deliberate. "I don't want your things, Richard. Keep them. All I want is my dignity." But as she moved toward the door, his hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. His face hovered inches from hers, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Don't think you can walk away so easily. You owe me. Don't forget who kept you afloat all these years." Clara struggled against his hold, fear clawing at her chest. "Let me go," she hissed, trying to pull free. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hall. A secretary appeared at the doorway, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Mr. Hale, the managing director is waiting for you in your office." For a split second, Richard's grip tightened, his jaw clenched. Then he released her abruptly, straightening his suit as if nothing had happened. He cast Clara a final glare. "You're lucky," he muttered before striding past the secretary without another word. Clara stood trembling, rubbing her sore arm. The secretary gave her a questioning look, but Clara simply shook her head and hurried down the hall. She could not bear another second in the same building as him. Outside, the winter air sliced against her cheeks. She walked aimlessly, boots crunching through snow, her breath unsteady. She had nowhere to go, no home, no safe haven. Only the cold streets of Boston stretched before her. Her thoughts drifted unbidden to her past. She had been alone before. She knew what it was to lose everything. When she was a child, her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her in the care of her grandmother. That small woman, fragile in appearance but strong in spirit, had raised Clara with warmth and discipline. For years it had been just the two of them against the world. When her grandmother passed away, Clara thought she had lost the last anchor in her life, until Richard came along. He had seemed steady, charming, ambitious. He had made her believe in security again. She had poured her heart into him, into their shared work, convinced that finally she had found her place. Now that illusion lay shattered. She was that lonely girl again, wandering through the cold with no one to turn to. The memory of her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. Life will test you, Clara, but you must not break. You come from strong roots. Remember that. Her eyes stung, but she held back the tears this time. She had cried enough. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the streets, muffling the sounds of the city. Clara pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. She didn't know where her path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She could not go back. Clara stood before the heavy front door of the apartment she had once called home. Snow swirled around her, clinging to her coat and lashes. But the cold wasn't what made her shiver. She slid her key into the lock, twisted and stopped. The key jammed, refusing to turn. She tried again, harder this time, her breath coming out in frosty bursts. Nothing. A sick realization hit her. Richard had changed the locks. Her chest tightened as she pressed her forehead against the wood, fighting the urge to collapse right there on the landing. The place she had shared with him, decorated with her books and photographs, was no longer hers. She was locked out of her own life, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She turned away. The snow muffled her footsteps as she descended the stairs and stepped back into the street. Where could she go? She thought of the office. At least there she had history, familiarity, a desk that still bore her name. When she arrived, the receptionist's eyes flickered with discomfort. Clara forced a small smile, though her heart was pounding. "I'm here to pick up some files," she explained, adjusting her scarf. But before she could move toward her office, a voice cut through the air. "You don't belong here anymore." Richard's tone was sharp, commanding. He had followed her, or perhaps anticipated her, standing tall in the lobby. He looked every bit the man in control. "You were dismissed yesterday. Security has orders. You can't walk in as if nothing happened." The receptionist's eyes darted nervously between them. Clara swallowed hard. "Dismissed? You can't just erase me from this place. I've given years of my life." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You gave me years, Clara. That's what this was. My company, my success, my name. You were along for the ride. Don't fool yourself into thinking you mattered here without me." Her breath caught in her throat. "This was our work. I helped build it with you. Don't rewrite history." He smirked, turning to wave a hand at a passing colleague. "Enjoy your afternoon." Then to Clara again. His words dropped like shards of ice. "If you make trouble, I'll make sure every door in this city shuts in your face. No job, no reputation, nothing." Tears threatened, but she forced them back. To cry in front of him would be another victory for Richard. "I don't want your empire," she whispered. "But you won't break me." Richard's expression darkened. But before he could reply, two security officers approached. Their posture was polite but firm. "Miss Bennett, you'll need to leave now." Clara looked at the familiar halls, the offices where she had laughed with coworkers, stayed late through deadlines, celebrated small victories. Each memory felt like a blade twisting deeper. With a final glance at Richard, she straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm leaving." She walked out into the gray light of afternoon, her heart pounding. The city seemed colder now, harsher, as if it too had turned against her. She was jobless, homeless, cast out not only by the man she had trusted, but by the life they had built together. For a moment she considered her options. There weren't many. Her savings were locked in joint accounts that Richard controlled. Friends in Boston were few. Most of her world had revolved around him. But then a memory surfaced, her grandmother's house in the countryside. A modest home that had sat empty since her passing. It was miles away in a quiet town on the edge of New Hampshire. She hadn't been back in years, but it was still hers. The thought brought both pain and relief. Pain because it reminded her of what she had lost. Relief because at least there was somewhere she could go. Pulling her coat tighter, Clara began walking with new determination. The streets of Boston blurred as she thought of the little white house with its peeling shutters and creaky porch. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was a place that belonged to her, untouched by Richard's reach. As she headed toward the train station, the weight of her situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. Everything familiar had been stripped away in a matter of days. Yet beneath the grief, a spark of defiance flickered. Richard might have taken her job, her home, and her stability, but he hadn't taken her will to survive. Clara's boots crunched against the icy pavement as she moved forward one step at a time. The storm had not let up, but neither would she. Clara dragged her suitcase along the icy pavement, the wheels catching in the snow. The train station wasn't far, but her body ached with exhaustion. She had barely eaten, barely slept, and the weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest like a stone. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the man stepping out of the glass doors of a downtown office building until they collided. The impact jolted her backward, and she would have fallen if not for his quick reflexes. A strong hand caught her arm, steadying her. "I'm sorry," Clara murmured automatically, her eyes still downcast. "No, that was my fault." His voice was calm, assured, the voice of someone accustomed to being in control. Clara looked up and found herself staring into the face of a man in his mid-30s, sharply dressed in a tailored wool coat. His features were striking, dark hair neatly combed, eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything they saw. For a moment time seemed to shift. The moment their hands touched, a vision rushed into Clara's mind, so vivid it stole her breath. She saw him behind the wheel of a sleek black car, headlights slicing through the snow. Then in a flash the car careened across an icy road. Metal twisted, glass shattered. The image ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Clara shaken and pale. She jerked her hand back, her heart hammering. The man frowned. "Are you all right?" Clara swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. You shouldn't drive tonight, please. I don't know how to explain it, but I had this feeling. Something bad will happen if you do." He studied her. His expression caught between curiosity and skepticism. "You don't even know me, and you're telling me not to drive." Her cheeks burned, but the urgency in her chest wouldn't let her stay silent. "I know how it sounds, but please just don't get behind the wheel. Trust me." The man exhaled, clearly unconvinced. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't live my life by premonitions from strangers." His tone was polite, though dismissive. "Take care of yourself." He gave a brief nod and walked toward the curb where a black sedan waited with its lights on. Clara stood frozen, the vision replaying in her mind like a warning siren. The man slid into the back seat, but instead of driving off, he pulled out his phone. Clara didn't realize he was calling someone until his voice carried faintly across the snowy street. "Andrew, I won't be able to drive tonight," he said. "Take the car if you need it. I'll get another ride." Clara's breath caught. A chill spread down her spine. An hour later, as Clara sat huddled on a bench at the train station, the news blared from the television mounted on the wall. "Breaking. A fatal accident has occurred on the I-93 this evening. A black luxury sedan lost control on the icy road. The driver was killed instantly." Her coffee cup slipped from her hands, hot liquid splashing onto the floor. Her vision blurred, but not from tears. It was shock. The image in her mind had been real. The man, the stranger she had warned, would have been the one behind the wheel. Instead, someone else was dead. The screen cut to footage of the mangled car, twisted metal glittering with shards of ice. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Around her, passengers muttered in horror, but she couldn't hear them. Her mind was fixed on the man's face, his skeptical gaze, the weight of his hand steadying her. Who is he? She wondered, her pulse racing. And why had fate chosen her to see what was coming? At that very moment across the city, Jonathan Mercer sat in the corner of an upscale restaurant, his phone buzzing with the news. His friend Andrew was gone, killed in the crash of a car Jonathan himself was supposed to be driving. He leaned back in his chair, pale and shaken, remembering the woman he had bumped into only hours earlier. Her urgent voice echoed in his mind. "Don't drive tonight. Please, something bad will happen." He had brushed her off. He had laughed inwardly at her strange intensity, and yet she had been right. Jonathan clenched his jaw, staring out at the swirling snow beyond the restaurant's frosted window. Whoever she was, she had seen what he couldn't. She had, in some impossible way, saved his life. The train ride out of Boston was long and cold. The windows streaked with frost that blurred the lights of the city as they faded into the distance. Clara sat huddled in her seat, her suitcase tucked close to her knees, her body still trembling from exhaustion. She hadn't eaten more than a piece of bread all day, but her stomach churned too much to take anything else in. Outside, the cityscape gave way to rolling fields and frozen woods. The snow thickened as the train pushed north, blanketing the world in silence. For Clara, the quiet was both a comfort and a curse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face twisted in contempt, or the vision of twisted metal from the crash she had foreseen. When the train screeched to a halt at the small rural station, Clara was one of only a handful of passengers who stepped off. The platform was nearly deserted, lit only by a flickering lamp and muffled by the heavy snow. She pulled her scarf tighter and began the walk toward the town where her grandmother's old house still stood. The road was barely visible beneath the drifts. Her boots sank deep into the snow and the wind stung her face. She walked slowly, her suitcase dragging behind her, breath rising in ragged clouds. Halfway through the stretch of road leading toward the outskirts, she spotted a figure slumped against a snowbank. At first she thought it was just a pile of coats, discarded trash perhaps, but as she drew closer, she realized it was a man. His shoulders twitched faintly, his head lolling forward. Clara dropped her suitcase and hurried over. "Daniel," she gasped, recognizing the familiar face under the frost. Daniel Brooks, her childhood neighbor. Once a bright, reckless boy who had grown into a man who never seemed to escape the bottle. His lips were blue, his skin ashen. The reek of alcohol clung to him, sour and sharp even in the frozen air. He muttered something incoherent, his teeth chattering. "Daniel, you can't stay here," Clara said, panic rising in her throat. "You'll freeze to death." With what strength she had left, she pulled him up, slinging his arm over her shoulder. He was heavier than she remembered, his body limp with intoxication. They stumbled forward together, Clara's boots sliding on the icy road. Her muscles screamed, but she refused to let go. The Brooks family's house was only a block away. She dragged him there, pounding on the door until his sister answered, her face pale with shock. Together they got him inside, laid him on the couch near the fireplace. "You saved him," his sister whispered, tears in her eyes. Clara shook her head, brushing snow from her coat. "Just keep him warm. He won't survive another night out there." She didn't wait for thanks. She picked up her suitcase from the roadside and continued toward her grandmother's house. When she finally reached the familiar lane, her chest tightened. The little white cottage stood hunched under the snow, shutters hanging crooked, the roof sagging from years of neglect. No light shone from the windows. Clara pushed open the gate, its hinges squealing in protest. The porch creaked under her boots as she climbed the steps, her hand trembling as she fitted the key into the lock. The door swung open to darkness and stale air. Inside the house smelled of dust and time. The furniture was just as her grandmother had left it, covered with sheets and cobwebs. The air was icy, colder than outside, the kind of chill that seeped into bones. Clara set her suitcase down and sank onto the nearest chair, her body quaking. She tried to light the old stove, but the matches slipped from her numb fingers. Her breath came shallow, her head swimming. By the time she managed to coax a small fire into the stove, her vision was already blurring. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. She pressed a hand to her temple and felt the fever burning through her. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, but they gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the couch, pulling a moth-eaten blanket over herself. Her body shivered violently, then went still as exhaustion claimed her. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows, piling drifts against the door. In the shadows of her grandmother's abandoned home, Clara lay trembling, her skin clammy, her breathing shallow. She was alone, far from help, and her strength was slipping away. The last thought before darkness overtook her was of her grandmother's voice, steady and strong. "You're a Bennett, Clara. You don't give up." But the fever was stronger than her will, and soon everything dissolved into silence. Jonathan Mercer had barely slept since the night of the accident. The news replayed in his head over and over. Andrew, killed in the crash of the car Jonathan was supposed to be driving. If it hadn't been for that woman, the one with the haunted eyes who had warned him, he would have been the one inside that twisted wreck. He couldn't shake her voice. Please don't drive tonight. Something bad will happen. He had dismissed her words at the time, but now they echoed in his thoughts like a bell tolling in the distance. Jonathan tried to throw himself into work, into meetings, into contracts, but none of it mattered. The thought of her lingered. Who is she? Why had she been so certain? And where had she gone? He asked around at the station, even retraced the street where they had collided. A security guard remembered seeing a pale young woman hauling a suitcase into the snow, heading toward the trains northbound. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. Days later, on a business errand that pulled him out toward the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border, he remembered her again. Something drew him to search, to follow the faint trail of questions until he found himself standing in front of a small cottage. Its roof heavy with snow, windows dark. Jonathan knocked, but no answer came. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning. Inside, the air was stale and frigid. Then he saw her. Clara lay curled on a faded couch wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her skin pale and glistening with fever sweat. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. Jonathan's chest tightened at the sight. God! He muttered, rushing forward. He knelt beside her, touching her forehead. The heat of her fever burned against his palm. She stirred faintly, whispering something he couldn't make out. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile like carrying porcelain. Bracing against the wind, he carried her to his car, the storm battering against them with cruel force. He laid her carefully across the back seat and drove as fast as the icy roads would allow toward Boston. By the time he reached the hospital, she was barely conscious. Nurses rushed her onto a gurney. Questions flying at him all at once. Name, relation, insurance. I'll cover everything, Jonathan said firmly, pulling out his wallet. Private room, full care, whatever she needs. The staff exchanged glances but didn't argue. His tone carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Hours blurred into one another as Jonathan paced the corridor outside the ward. Finally, a doctor approached him. She's stable now. Severe hypothermia compounded by infection. She'll need time, but she's young and strong. She should recover. Relief washed over him, stronger than he expected. He nodded, unable to speak. When Clara opened her eyes again, she was lying in a warm hospital bed. Crisp sheets covered her and an IV drip hummed softly at her side. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she turned her head and saw him. Jonathan sat in the chair beside her bed, his coat draped over the armrest. Fatigue etched in the lines of his face. He looked up as she stirred, and for the first time Clara saw something different in his eyes. Not skepticism but gratitude. You're awake, he said softly, almost as though he was afraid to disturb her. Clara tried to speak, her throat dry. Why are you here? He leaned closer, his voice steady. Because you saved my life, and I couldn't let you fade away in some forgotten house. Her lips trembled. She remembered the collision, the vision, her desperate warning. The accident. It happened, didn't it? Jonathan nodded slowly. It wasn't me. I gave the car to a friend. He's gone. His jaw tightened, grief flickering across his features. But it should have been me. You were right. And because of you, I'm alive. Clara closed her eyes briefly, a wave of emotion crashing over her. I didn't mean for anyone else. I know. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. His touch was steady, grounding. But you were the only one who saw it. I don't know how, and maybe I don't need to. What matters is that you saved me. A nurse entered quietly, checking Clara's vitals. She glanced at Jonathan and smiled faintly. Your husband's been very devoted, she remarked, scribbling on the chart. Clara flushed, too weak to correct her. Jonathan said nothing, but his grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. When the nurse left, silence settled over the room again, warm and heavy. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, yes, but more than that, an inexplicable bond formed in the crucible of crisis. Jonathan's gaze softened and Clara, despite the fever still clinging to her body, felt the smallest flicker of safety. For days, Jonathan stayed near her, making calls from the hospital, bringing her meals, making sure every need was met. Clara tried to protest once, insisting he didn't owe her anything, but he silenced her gently. "I owe you everything," he said. And though Clara's body remained weak, her heart stirred with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not despair, not fear, but the faintest glimmer of hope. By the time Clara was discharged from the hospital, nearly 2 weeks had passed. The fever had broken, but her body was still fragile. She moved slowly, each step measured, her strength not yet fully returned. Jonathan insisted on driving her back, though she had no clear answer when he asked where she planned to stay. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I'll manage. Maybe the cottage again. It's all I have." Jonathan shook his head firmly as he steered the car through Boston's busy streets. "That's not acceptable. That house is unfit for anyone to live in. Especially while you're recovering. You need warmth, stability. You need care." She started to protest, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "I have a place. There's room more than enough. Come stay at my home until you're well. It's not charity, Clara. Consider it repayment for saving my life." Her throat tightened at the conviction in his voice. There was no hint of pity, only resolve. "Jonathan," she began cautiously, "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be," he said simply. "Besides, there's something else I want to discuss with you." A few days later, when she had regained enough strength to sit upright without exhaustion, he invited her to lunch in his study. The space was lined with shelves of leather-bound books and the wide desk of a man who dealt in large affairs. Clara felt out of place at first, but Jonathan's presence steadied her. He poured her tea, then leaned forward. "I want you to work with me. I'm launching a new division within my company, publishing to be precise. I've read your files, your background. You know this world better than anyone I've interviewed. You have insight, intuition. What happened at your old firm? It was their loss. I'd be honored if you join me." Clara blinked, stunned. "You're offering me a job." "Not just a job. I want you as my partner on this project, someone I can trust." Her pulse quickened. After everything she had lost, her home, her career, her dignity, the offer felt like a lifeline. Still, doubts nagged at her. "Why me? You hardly know me." Jonathan's gaze was steady. "Because when everything else was noise, you spoke the truth. You warned me and I lived. You have a clarity most people don't. I need someone like that beside me." Clara's eyes stung, emotion welling up. She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it." His expression softened, relief flickering across his face. "Good, then it's settled, and until you're fully recovered, you'll stay at my house. It'll be easier to coordinate everything." She agreed, though uncertainty tugged at her. When the car pulled through the wrought iron gates of Jonathan's estate later that afternoon, Clara was struck by the grandeur of it. The Mercer home was a sprawling stone mansion on the outskirts of the city, its manicured lawns now buried beneath winter snow. It was a world far removed from the drafty cottage she had nearly died in. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and faint lavender. The staff greeted Jonathan with respect and Clara with polite curiosity. He showed her to a guest room on the second floor, large and warm, with windows that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Perhaps here, at least for a while, she could heal. But that sense of fragile safety shattered the next evening. Clara had just finished reviewing some preliminary files Jonathan had given her when she heard laughter echoing through the grand hall. A woman's laughter, sharp, confident, familiar. When Clara stepped into the parlor, she froze. Standing beside Jonathan was a tall, striking red-haired woman, her arm casually linked with his. She was dressed elegantly, her smile polished. But to Clara, she was instantly recognizable. The hair, the posture, the mocking glint in her eyes. It was her, the woman who had been in Clara's bed with Richard. Jonathan noticed her hesitation and gestured. "Clara, this is Isabella Cross. My fiancée." The room tilted for a moment, Clara's stomach lurching as the words sank in. Fiancé, of course. A man like Jonathan wouldn't be without someone at his side. But fate had chosen a cruel hand. Isabella's smile widened when she saw Clara, though it didn't reach her eyes. "So, you're the assistant Jonathan has been talking about," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How quaint." Clara's heart pounded. Memories of betrayal crashed over her, blending Richard's face with Isabella's laughter. She forced her lips into a tight line, but inside the ground beneath her seemed to crumble. The safety she thought she had found had just twisted into another battlefield. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act, though Clara felt like she was walking a tightrope over fire. From the moment Isabella realized who she was, that Clara had seen her in Richard's bed, there was no disguising the contempt in her eyes. In front of the household staff, Isabella wielded her cruelty like a blade. "You missed a page," Isabella sneered one afternoon, sweeping into the study where Clara had been compiling research for Jonathan's new publishing project. She plucked a folder from Clara's hands and tossed it carelessly onto the desk. "For someone with such a prestigious background, you make such simple mistakes." Her voice was loud enough for the nearby maid to hear. Clara's face flushed, but she kept her tone even. "I was going to add the final section once Jonathan approved the outline." "Excuses," Isabella said with a brittle laugh. She turned to the maid. "Can you imagine trusting someone like this with serious work? Jonathan is too kind, too charitable for his own good." Clara wanted to disappear, but before she could respond, Jonathan entered the room. He picked up the folder, flipped through the contents and shot Isabella a pointed look. "It's complete. Exactly what I asked for. Clara has an eye for detail that others lack." The room went still. Isabella's smile faltered for just a moment before she regained her composure. "If you say so, darling," she said smoothly, though her eyes burned with fury as she brushed past Clara on her way out. This became a pattern. Isabella's barbs came daily. Remarks about Clara's clothes, her background, the fact that she was living under Jonathan's roof. Yet each time Jonathan found subtle ways to counter her, either by praising Clara's work, or by ensuring she had the resources and respect she deserved. Despite the tension, Clara threw herself into the project. She worked late into the night, drafting proposals, analyzing manuscripts, and organizing strategies. Jonathan often joined her, their conversations drifting from work into something softer: music, literature, memories of childhood. It was during one of those evenings, paper spread across the mahogany desk, that Jonathan finally spoke of his past. "My father never trusted me to make my own choices," he admitted, his voice low, his gaze distant. "He believes marriage is just another business transaction. With Isabella, he sees a merger of influence, wealth, and old family ties. To him, feelings are irrelevant." Clara listened quietly, her pen still in her hand. "And what do you see?" she asked softly. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "For years I told myself I could live with it, that duty and loyalty were enough. But after Andrew's death, after meeting you, I can't keep lying to myself. I want more than this arrangement." His eyes found hers, searching, lingering a beat too long. Clara's breath caught. She looked away, her heart pounding. She knew the danger of that look, the weight it carried. But she also knew she was no longer the same woman who had allowed Richard to define her worth. Jonathan's gaze both terrified and steadied her. Isabella, however, was not blind. She sensed the shift, the unspoken closeness growing between them. Her fury became sharper, her public humiliations more frequent. One morning, in front of the entire household staff, Isabella gestured at Clara's modest dress and said with a cold laugh, "Our assistant seems to think she's at home here. Perhaps she forgets she's still just a guest and a charity case at that." Clara stiffened, words choking in her throat. But before she could defend herself, Jonathan's voice cut through the air, firm and clear. "Enough, Isabella." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's cheeks burned red, but Jonathan didn't waver. "Clara is not a charity case. She is the reason my current project is moving forward at all. If you cannot show her respect, then you insult me as well." The staff exchanged startled glances, but Clara felt something else, a flicker of safety, of being seen. Later that evening, Jonathan found her in the library where she sat curled in an armchair, a book forgotten in her lap. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, sitting across from her. "You shouldn't have to apologize," Clara replied. "You've already done more for me than I can ever repay." He leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "I don't protect you out of obligation, Clara. I do it because you deserve it." Because you've shown me a truth I can't ignore. Her heart tightened, both warmed and unsettled. She nodded, unable to find words, the weight of his gaze lingering long after he left the room. And though the storm between Isabella and Jonathan grew fiercer each day, Clara sensed that something deeper, stronger, and far more dangerous was taking root, an unspoken bond that no insult or scheme could undo. Winter's grip on Boston had not softened, but inside the Mercer estate, the cold came from a different storm. Isabella's hostility toward Clara had grown so blatant that even the staff whispered about it behind closed doors. Every meal, every gathering, every chance she had, Isabella made sure to remind Clara she was an outsider. The final confrontation came not in a private argument, but in the grand foyer, under the glittering chandelier, with half the household as witness. Isabella, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness, made a comment about Clara's past, about her reliance on Jonathan's charity, implying a relationship far less professional than it was. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, the old shame and hurt rising like a tide. But this time she didn't freeze. She took a steadying breath, ready to speak her own defense. She never got the chance. Jonathan stepped forward, his presence suddenly dominating the spacious hall. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was absolute, ringing with a finality that silenced every whisper. "Isabella," he said, his tone colder than the winter outside. "You will stop. Now. And you will never speak to Clara or about her in that manner again. Not in this house, not anywhere." Isabella gaped at him, her composure shattered. "How dare you?" "I dare," he interrupted, his gaze unwavering, "because this is my home, and Clara Bennett is under my protection. More than that, she has my respect, which is more than I can say for you at this moment. Our arrangement is a business one, a farce orchestrated by our families. It ends today." The air crackled with the shock of his declaration. Isabella looked from Jonathan's resolute face to Clara's stunned one, her own features twisting into a mask of pure fury. Without another word, she turned on her heel, her exit as dramatic as her entrance had been, the heavy front door echoing shut behind her. In the ringing silence that followed, Jonathan turned to Clara. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet intensity. "I should have done that the day you arrived," he said, his voice meant for her alone. The battle lines were drawn, and Jonathan had chosen his side. Openly, publicly, there was no going back.